Today's daf we're going to be learning is Ketubot Yudalid. Today's daf is sponsored by Avi Unitzman for the Refuah Shlema of Moshe David ben Svia. Okay, a few quick reminders. So Zoom is continuing until Sunday morning. Sunday morning there will be no Zoom for about a month, but there will be regular shiurim. Everything will be up online. But I will be pointing out that I will be recording a number of dapim in advance. So if you have a dedication, on a particular day, please let us know in advance because all the shiurim will be recorded somewhat in advance. So make sure to get it in early and be understanding that if it's already been recorded, then we'll just put it on a different day. And bookmarks are open till today, so get in your orders as quickly as you can. And we want to get those out and done. So please let us know. You can find it on a pop-up. If you go on our site right now, there's a pop-up and you can just click there and order your free bookmarks. Okay, moving on to our daf. Starting from the bottom of your Gimel Amud Bet, I'll just remind you what we're up to. We discussed a number of machlokot between Rabbi Yehoshua on the one hand, Rabban Gamliel on the other. It's Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, but we're going to basically be referring to it all the time as Rabban Gamliel's position, which is in a case of, we saw a whole bunch of different cases, but let's pick our last case, where we have a woman who's pregnant, and we don't know who she's pregnant from, which means if she's pregnant from someone who's pasul, who's what we call a disqualified person, all sorts of people, nitim, mamzer, if he was a chalal, she now can't marry a kohen. Okay, she can marry anybody else, but she can't marry a kohen. So the question is, she says, it was from the father of the child, is someone who's kosher, and therefore I can marry a kohen. Do we believe her or not? Rabban Gamliel says we believe her. Basically, number one, she has tanat bari, a definitive claim, and she has a chazaka of being shera. Before this incident happened, she was already permitted to a kohen. So we're going to keep her in what we call her presumptive status. In the words of the Gemara, it's chazaka. She has chezkat kashrut. We're going to keep her in her presumptive status and allow her to marry a kohen. Rabbi Yehoshua says, no, lo mipia anu chayim, we don't trust her, we don't believe her, and we don't go by her presumptive status, and he is basically strict. We said it's because malasu biyuchsin, right? He wants to be strict when it comes to kohanim getting married, okay? But in any case, he doesn't believe her. So now we have a story, a different situation, and potentially different issues. Hahu arus v'arusato, we have an engaged couple, and now we have a bigger issue, because we have an engaged couple, and she's pregnant. Now, she's pregnant when she's engaged. Well, now we have an issue. Number one, she's pregnant by somebody else. She's forbidden to be married to him, basically. Asur labal, asur laboel. And it's not just baal husband. He's enough of her husband when they're betrothed that she wouldn't be able to stay with him. And number two, the blood, the child could be a mamzer. Okay. And number three issue, can she marry a kohen? Because do we have to assume that maybe we don't know who it was, and maybe it was someone who's disqualified. The other thing I want to point out before we move on is the one thing we saw at the end of yesterday's daf, and also even earlier in yesterday's daf, was that Rabban Gamliel, who permits it even if the majority of the people in the community are psulim, right? Even if most of them are disqualified, he still says we believe her. We have a tanat bari, her definitive claim, she has chizkat kashrut. That's enough to override even the majority of people in the community being mamzerim, let's say, or netinim, or whatever they might be. Rabbi Yehoshua, who disagrees and thinks we don't believe her, doesn't believe her even if rov ksherim, okay? Basically, the whole thing of majority and what the statistics say doesn't play a factor here. So now we have this case of arus v'arusato, the atu l'kamei de Rav Yosef. So the couple comes before Rav Yosef, she's pregnant. He amra minei. She says it's his child, which means no problem of mamzerim, no problem of she can't be forbidden to him. She was with him. She wasn't an adulterous relationship, and she wants to marry a kohen. We're assuming the guy is kosher, so she's saying he's kosher, and therefore I can go marry a kohen, right? Assuming he dies, let's say. V'hu amar in minai, and in fact he admits the same thing. He says, yeah, I'm the father. So the question is, do we believe them or not? To which Rav Yosef says, why not? I'm Rav Yosef, l'may nichushla. In other words, what's the issue, basically? Like, they came before him, and he said, I don't even see the issue. Number one, deka kamoda. He agrees, right? The cases we discussed before, either she claims this is the father, and no one else is saying anything else, right? We don't have another side. Here, we don't have a man saying it was me. Here we have a man saying, I agree with her. And number two, if we go back to all those other cases where it was her claim against his claim, here they both say the same thing. So that should help the case. Ve'od. And furthermore, ha'amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel, halacha ke Rabban Gamliel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, we paskin like Rabban Gamliel. Now, what did Rabban Gamliel say in all these cases? The woman keeps her presumptive status. And therefore, we assume everything's fine unless proven otherwise. And here we have no reason to prove otherwise. So that sounds pretty simple. But Abaye is not very pleased with his answer. Amalei Abaye. He has two problems. Number one, ubaha kilo modeh. Sorry, he has one issue. My mistake. One issue. He says, ubaha kilo modeh machshir Rabban Gamliel. In this case, if he didn't admit, were Rabban Gamliel machshir? It's going to say, basically, we have an issue here with Rabban Gamliel. Ha'amarle to paskin like Rabban Gamliel. Ha'amarle Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda shinina. Shmuel said to Rabbi Yehuda, now remember, he said, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, halacha Rabban Gamliel. But Rabbi Yehuda himself was told by Shmuel, shinina, which was a term of endearment he used for Rabbi Yehuda. Halacha Rabban Gamliel. Okay, yes, I'm paskin like Rabban Gamliel, but even though we said that Rabban Gamliel permitted it, even if the majority of people were disqualified, so he permitted her anyway to marry a kohen in the regular case, right? Not in our case. Our case is a different case, but we're comparing it. He said to him, yes, the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel, but don't act upon it unless there's rov ksherim etzla. Unless the majority of people in the community, right? We have a woman who's pregnant. We don't know who she's pregnant from. She says it's from so-and-so who's kosher. Don't believe her, even though Rabban Gamliel says you can believe her. Only believe her if rov ksherim. Okay? If the majority of the people in the city are ksherim, which basically ups her chances of having been with someone who is kosher. Now, how does that compare to us? Is this a case where rov were psulim? Of course rov were psulim, because our issue is not, can she marry a kohen only? And then we have to check what's the majority, what's the percentage of netinim, mamzerim, chalalim, all those people, avadim, right? That's not the issue. The issue here is what we said, there's two other issues. If it's not him, then she's an adulteress, which means she's forbidden to him and the child's a mamzer. Well, what's her choice here? Either him and then the child's not a mamzer, or everybody else and the child's a mamzer, right? If it's anyone else other than him, right? So 99.9%, right, are forbidden to her. Rov psulin etzla, right? Hacha, in our case, rov or psulin. So if Shmuel told Rabbi Yehuda that we're going to paskin like Rabban Gamliel, only in the case, and only do an action by him if you have rov ksherim, you certainly don't have rov ksherim here. Okay, even though she was betrothed to this guy, and maybe there's more of a chance it was him than anyone else. But the fact is, majority of the people, everybody else in the world, is forbidden to her because she's betrothed to this guy, as opposed to the case of the Meuberet, where she wasn't married. So it was just a matter of, what's the percentage of nitinin and mamzerim and all that. Now, that's Abaye's question against Rav Yosef. But Rav Yosef takes a big issue with what Abaye questioned and with the statement that Shmuel said. So the statement Shmuel said makes absolutely no sense. You should be questioning that statement that Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda itself. Because why? Halacha, we paskin like Rabban Gamliel, but don't act unless there's rov ksherim. That doesn't make any sense. Because Rabban Gamliel himself said, and we learned this already, that rov isn't a factor here. So how can you say I'm holding like Rabban Gamliel, but I'm not really holding like Rabban Gamliel, right? There's no such thing. Either you hold like Rabban Gamliel, and then you're going to permit it even if we're psulim, and then you should permit our case. Or you're going to forbid it, and then forbid it like Rabbi Yehoshua. But you can't say I hold like Rabban Gamliel, but I'm only going to permit it if rov ksherim. That's not Rabban Gamliel. So Elamayit lachlamemer comes Rav Yosef, and he says the only way you can understand Shmuel is like this. Halechatchila hadiavad. He says, when he said halacha like Rabban Gamliel, but don't do it unless there's rov ksherim, he means you can pass it like Rabban Gamliel across the board in every case, b'di'evet, if the case is already post facto. It's a done deal. Then let it go. Meaning, if a woman, okay, let's just take our case. A woman, the original case, single woman is pregnant. She didn't go ask a rabbi or ask the Beit Din, can she marry? She went and married a kohen anyway. And then, right, then we find out that rov psulim, right? What do we say? Well, we can hold like Rabban Gamliel anyway, okay? Because Rabban Gamliel said it's fine. But if she comes to us and she was pregnant and she claims who it was from, but the fact is the majority of the people in the community are mamzerim and chalalim and avadim and all that, then we don't allow her to marry the kohen. Okay, so when she's coming to us to get married, we're going to say no. That's lechatchila. So when when Shmuel said to Rabbi Yehuda, we paskin like Rabban Gamliel, but only if rov are ksherim, that's in a case where she's standing before us and wants to get married. If it's a done deal, then there's nothing, then obviously. Now listen, Rabban Gamliel himself thought it was okay across the board. But Shmuel saying, when it comes to paskin and galacha, we're going to paskin like him, but only b'di'evet, not lechatchila. Now, right, that's not Rabban Gamliel. It's how we paskin like Rabban Gamliel. But since and the whole point here is, since we're paskining like Rabban Gamliel, if it's already a done deal, we're going to allow it no matter what. Now, what's our case? Hanami, our case, k'di'evet dami. It's no more b'di'evet than this. She's married, she's betrothed, she's pregnant with a child, right? Of course, we're going to allow this, because if we're going to hold like Rabban Gamliel b'di'evet, this is b'di'evet. What's more b'di'evet than this? What we're going to start saying the blood of mom saying she has to get divorced from her betrothal? No, we're not going to say that. So, right, she's not standing before us saying, "Can I marry a kohen?" If she was standing before us saying, "Can I marry a kohen?" then already it would be a different story. Then we would say to her, "Let's check out what the majority of the city is." That's not the case here. So therefore, Rav Yosef goes back and supports what he said against Abaye's question. And now Abaye is going to raise another question against Rabbi Yehoshua. We're going to have here is Abaye is going to bring a Mishna in Eduyot. Eduyot is a Masechet all full of testimonies of people about halachas that they learned, okay, traditions that they had. And here we're going to see, the first part we're going to see is Abaye is going to ask Raba the following question, that Rabbi Yehoshua there contradicts Rabbi Yehoshua here. I'm going to compare these two cases, that one could claim, today's stuff is not the easiest stuff, and part of it is because they're making a bunch of comparisons that aren't exactly clear comparisons, okay? They're not exactly totally the same thing. But we're going to try to compare a case to our case. And then we're going to say Rabbi Yehoshua contradicts himself. Then Rava is going to answer the question. I'm giving you the whole structure because otherwise you might get a little bit lost. Abaye is going to ask a question for the Mishna in Eduyot. Rabbi Yehoshua contradicts himself based on, right, the Mishna there versus the Mishna here. Then we're going to have an answer of Rava. Then Rava is going to say, your answer didn't take into consideration the end of that Mishnah where Rabban Gamliel also contradicts what Rabban Gamliel says here. So we're going to have a flip. Rabbi Yehoshua, who's strict here, and Rabban Gamliel, who's lenient here, they're going to be flipped in the other case. And then, based on the double contradiction, Rava is going to bring a different way of resolving the contradiction. So Raba, the first one, not Rava, is only resolving one contradiction because Abaye only brought before him one contradiction. And Rava is going to say, no, there's two contradictions, and we're going to have to resolve them both in a different manner. So Ramele Abaye le Raba. Now it says Rava here, it has to be Raba, otherwise, as I explained the structure, it's going to make no sense because Rava is going to contradict, right? He's going to raise a question against what was said before. He can't possibly be raising a question against what he said. So it must be Raba. A lot of times Raba and Rava are confused because the manuscripts would often write Reish Bet with a chupchik, right? Short for Rava or Raba, and nobody, right? It's confusing which one's which. One, Rava was a generation before. He's the one who Abaye was adopted by Rava. And Rava is a colleague of Abaye's. So Rami le Abaye le Rava. Rabbi Yeshua, does he really say she's not believed in our Mishnah? That contradicts the Mishnah in Eduyot. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera al almanat isa shikshera lekehuna. They both agreed, Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. They both testified, not agreed, they both testified to the fact. Again, this is testifying about halachas, traditions, that almanat isa shikshera lekehuna. What is an almanat isa? It's quite a complicated case. There's different opinions. I'm going with Rashi. Almanat isa, first of all, isa means a dough. What's in a dough? What makes a dough unique? Well, you have no idea what's in it. When you look at a dough, you can't tell what the ingredients are. So here we're going to have a person. We don't know what the ingredients are. We don't know what's going on here. So what's the case? We're going to have two almanot, so it's going to be a little confusing. The first one we're going to talk about is not the almanat isa. So we have a couple. They're married. She gets a divorce from him, but it's a safek divorce. What does that mean? So Rashi gives an example. He throws her a get, and we're not sure if it was closer to him or closer to her, and whether it was considered that she actually received the get. We'll get to this case, we get to Gittin, not to spend too much time on it right now. So it's a case where it's not clear whether she was really divorced or not. She goes ahead and marries a kohen. Okay, so now she marries a kohen. He dies. Okay, he dies and she marries a kohen. So now, if he died, then she's an almanat. She can marry a kohen. Remember, she's not the almanat isa, so don't get confused. If he died, she can marry a kohen, no problem. If he divorced her before he died, then she's a grusha, she can't marry a kohen. So now we have this woman marries a kohen. So now their child is what we call a safek chalal. Maybe he's a chalal, maybe he's not. He marries another woman. And remember the halach I told you before. If a woman sleeps with a chalal, she can no longer marry a kohen. So this woman, now her husband, the safek chalal, maybe he's a chalal, maybe he's not, dies. Question is now, right, can she marry a kohen? Is she disqualified or not? Because she had relations with this person, but he's maybe a chalal, maybe not a chalal. So what did they testify? So this is similar to our case. Well, we'll talk about it in a minute. So he testified, both of them, and that's Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. Obviously, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera is not important for our purposes. Almanat isa shikshera lekehuna. She can marry a kohen. Now, why? It's a little bit strange. So you would think, if you would, how does this compare to our Mishnah now? Right? This isn't the case where she comes and testifies, I know he was kosher, like our Mishnah. But in our Mishnah, what did Rabbi Yosef say? We don't say, oh, well, until proven otherwise, we'll just assume she's in her chazkat kashrut, right? She was fine to marry Kohen before this whole episode happened, and she got pregnant. So let's just assume if she's saying she's married, she was, pregnant from a person who was kosher, let's just assume she retains her own status. Rabbi Yehoshua there said, no, we don't do that. But in this case, it seems like he is saying that because he's not allowing a safek, which is the same as ours was a safek, right? We don't know who she had relations with. We're not allowing a safek to ruin her presumptive status. She was fine to marry Kohen before, let's let her marry Kohen now. So Rabbi Yehoshua seems to be saying the opposite here than he said there. So Abaye, he says to him, Hachi Asher, you're comparing two very different cases. Hatam ishani seit bodeket v'niseit. When a woman goes to get married, she checks. Okay, well, who checked what here? It's a good question. Okay, we're assuming in the almanat isa case, there's different commentaries who say different things. There's a lot of confusion today because there's a lot of different interpretations, things that aren't clear. Some people say it's the first widow. When her husband died and she went to go marry someone else, she checked to make sure, she maybe was sure, we don't know whether the get was closer to him or closer to her, but she must have made sure before she married that kohen. Alternatively, it's the second almanah. Before she married the safek chalal, she made sure that she checked into it, and before really she married the kohen, the second time she got married, right? She made sure that this guy wasn't a chalal. She checked into what happened back then, even though we don't know, but she must have checked into it. So one of these women actually makes more sense to say was the original woman because she was closer to the event to be able to check the details better. Anyway, that's in that case. That's different because that's a woman who went and got married based on what she thought was the truth. Hacha, isha mazna, bodeket umazna. This single woman who got pregnant, she slept around. We don't trust her to check who she slept around with. No, this is a question. right? Ishama is now what? You think a woman who sleeps around, she's single, bodeket umazna, you think she checks? You think she's worrying about her future and her ability to marry a kohen down the road? No, she doesn't check into it. Now, what's funny is Tosfot yesterday used this as a yes, she is mazna bodeket, as opposed to someone who's raped, who doesn't have a choice in the matter. So it's very interesting. Here, it raises a question, okay? As compared to the other case where women got married according to halacha, we're going to assume that they checked into it and made sure that it was a halachic marriage. Whereas when she's sleeping around, we don't assume that she checks. And that's why Rabbi Yehoshua will be more lenient in the Isa case, the almanat case. But Rava, as I already told you, to Rabbi Yehoshua, kasha, to Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Gamliel, lo kasha, I don't understand. Why do you only raise a difficulty with Rabbi Yehoshua? And therefore, your answer saying that almanat Isa is more lenient, well, doesn't ride well with the continuation, which shows that Rabban Gamliel is stricter. And if Rabban Gamliel is stricter, well, then we need to come up with an answer that's going to explain not only why Rabbi Yehoshua was more lenient in that case, but now we're going to have to understand why Rabban Gamliel was stricter in that case and didn't allow this almanat Isa to marry. Hakatani Seifa, as it says in the end of that Mishna, Amar lahem Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel says to them, meaning Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, when they testified, Kibalnu edutchem. Okay, we accept. He was, I guess, the head of the court, right? We know Rabban Gamliel was the head of the yeshiva. He says, we accept your testimony. Aval manaseh shaharei gazal ben Yochanan ben Zakkai shelo lo shi beitin al kach shakohanim shomim lachem lerachik aval lo lekarev. He says, it's very nice that you say that, and I believe that you have a tradition. But Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai came along and said, no way can the kohanim listen to this. Okay. We won't have a court reside to discuss this issue and permit an almanat Isa to marry a kohen, because kohanim should distance themselves from women like this and not bring them closer. Meaning, this is similar to what we talked about Rabbi Yehoshua before. The chachamim, right, that assume ma'ala b'yuchsin. When it comes to a kohen, you should stay away from anything that might have any sort of possibility. So we shouldn't marry this woman that's a safek chalal. So you might have a tradition that's okay, but Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai came along and said, no way, no how can we act upon this? So now we have to explain why we're going to be more strict in that case, according to Rabban Gamliel, and less strict in our case, and whereas Rabbi Yehoshua flipped. So what does he explain? Ha-tam bari ha-chashema. Sorry, I skipped the first line. Ela amara Rava, Rabban Gamliel lo kasha. We're not going to say, okay, now, what's the issue? Let's talk about it before we even see this inside. Rabban Gamliel, in our case, she was pregnant, a single woman. We said presumptive status was she was permitted to a kohen. She makes a claim. Let's believe her claim and let her stay with her chazak. Almanat Isa, what does he say? She can't retain her presumptive status. We have to be concerned that she slept with this chalal. Maybe he was a chalal. She definitely slept with someone. We just don't know was he a chalal or not. We have to assume maybe he was a chalal, and therefore we can't allow her to marry. So forget presumptive status. So why ignore presumptive status, and in our case, keep presumptive status? So he says, Hatam bari ha-chashema. It's very simple. In our case, she made a claim and she said, I know he was kasher. In this case, she can't say, I know he was a chalal. Even if you say before, or at least maybe he disagrees with Raba, who claimed she must have checked. But even if she checked, she doesn't have a definitive claim, right? She can't know for sure. It's a safek. So remember, it's not just that Rabban Gamliel says we hold presumptive status. That's not enough. You need a bari claim. Remember, his whole thing was bari v'shema bari adif. When you have a definitive claim versus someone who says any yodea, I don't know, or suggests maybe she was raped once she was already betrothed. Maybe she slept with someone else, and it wasn't a rape case or something like that. That's a shema claim. Here, her claim in our case that she's pregnant, she says, I know this is the father. That's why we go for presumptive status. In this case, she doesn't know if he was a chalal or not. So her argument here is only shema. So that's why we don't go by presumptive status. What about Rabbi Yehoshua? Now we have to understand why is he going to go by presumptive status specifically there? Rabbi Yehoshua, nami lo kasha. Hatam chad sveka, hacha trei sveka. This is a very difficult line. Okay, it's easy to understand the words, but it's very hard to understand what he's talking about. In our case, there's only one safek. She's pregnant with someone's baby. Who's the father? Is it the one she says, or is it someone else's? But that's why one safek, we're going to be strict. there's one safek only. There's one doubt. When there's one doubt, what do we always say? Safek d'oraita l'chumra. It's the d'oraita issue, right? Can she marry a kohen or not? So one safek, we're going to forbid it. Hacha trei sfek. Now it becomes complicated. The almanat isa has two sfekot. Some people say because it's the safek about this woman is removed, meaning it's like cousins once removed or something. It's basically the safek was about the mother of this chalal, and then there's a safek about this woman who, now it wasn't a safek, better would be to say it's a safek whether she had relations with him or not. But that's not the safek. That would be a classic sfek sfeka. Is he a chalal? And did she have relations? It's not a sfek sfeka. Notice they even call it something different. It's trei sfek. Two suffix. Usually you call that a sfek sfeka. So it's clearly something a little bit different here, but it seems like it's a little bit more removed because there's a suffix about his status, and then there's something about his status, not just about his status, but his status regards her. It's not a great answer because that's not really two sfekot. The two sfekot come from one suffix. Is he a chalal or is he not a chalal? So it's a little bit difficult. I'm going to leave it as a difficulty because commentaries also struggle with it. In any case, he thinks that that's two sfekot, which means there's more reason to be lenient there. So now we get a little bit of a summary line. Hilkach, therefore, Rabban Gamliel, again, we're going to summarize their approaches. And here they're getting to really a conceptual framework. What's the issue for Rabban Gamliel? It's the nature of the claim. Alim le bari, if you have a bari claim, it's all about the nature of the claim. You have a stronger claim, then that's strong enough. Afilu b'chad sfek anami machshir. Even if it's a case of just one safek, we're going to allow it anyway. V'kil le shema, and shema is such a weak claim when you have no vadaut, no what's the word? No, I can't think of the word. Vadaut, no certainty. Ta'afilu b'sfek sfek anami pasul. Here, by the way, they call it sfek sfek, even though it's not really sfek sfeka. But even b'sfek sfek anami pasul, when you have two sfekot, we're not going to even allow an uncertain claim. Rabbi Yehoshua, so again, it's all about the nature of the claim. Is it a definitive claim or an uncertain claim? Or a certain or an uncertain? Rabbi Yehoshua, what is it? It's the nature of the case. Is it safek or sfek sfeka, right? Alim lechat sfeka, one safek is so strong, meaning when you have a doubt, that's still very strong because it's a doubt. We have to take that doubt very seriously. Ta'afilu b'bari nami pasul. Even if someone comes with a certain claim against your doubt, that certain claim is not going to override the doubt. The kill is sfek sfeka, but a sfek sfeka, when you have two sfekot, is so lenient that afilu b'shema nami machshir, even if you have a definitive claim, you're still going to allow it. Okay? So now they're going to say, sorry, did I say the wrong thing? Sfek sfeka, even with an uncertain claim, sorry, even with a shema, you're going to be nami machshir. I just looked at the wrong line by accident. Kilei sfek sfeka, dafilu b'shema nami machshir. A sfek sfeka is so weak that even if someone comes with an uncertain claim, this woman says, I don't know if he's a chalal or not, we're still going to permit it. So that's, because again, one holds nature of the claim, and one holds it's important the nature of the case. Okay, is it a safek or is it a sfek sfeka? Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to get for the rest of today's stuff until the very last Mishna, which we'll also learn. We're going to get into a braita that's a very confusing braita. There seem to be three opinions. None of them are clear. We're going to have three questions, one on the first opinion, one on the second opinion, one on the third opinion, and only then are we going to get an explanation of what exactly this is talking about. The reason we're getting into this is because this is a braita about the almanat isa that we made mention of in the previous sugya, but now we're kind of a little bit going outside of Rabbi Yosef or Rabban Gamliel a little bit. This seems to be defining what we know of an almanat isa already, what we learned today, which is it's a safek chalal case. It's not a safek of, is she a mamzer? Was she married to a mamzer? Was she married to a netin? Was she married to an eved? Why do they say avdei malachim? That's all a question. Some people say because the majority of slaves who married Jews were the slaves of kings, because the kings had lots of non-Jewish slaves. Anyway, that's a very side point. So, Amanamani says someone, it sounds like what he's saying is, who doesn't have safek, she'd marry someone who, or have relations with someone who was a safek mamzer, safek natin, or safek eved malachim. We're talking about, again, she's a widow of this person who is a safek. So what must it be? A safek chalal. And we're assuming right now, Tanakama will say, safek chalal is going to be permitted safek mamzer and the rest are not going to be permitted. Right? A woman of a safek mamzer who is married to an almanat, a widow from a safek mamzer, will not be permitted to marry a kohen. That's what we assume he's saying, although we're going to change that soon. Amar Rabbi Meir, Shamati, I heard, kol she'ein ba'achad mikol elu, anyone who's not a safek mamzer, nitin, or eved, right, who wasn't married to one of those, meaning, but was married to a chalal, misi'in l'kihuna. Okay, so I have a tradition. Anyone who didn't marry any of these can misi'in l'kihuna. Okay, we're now on Amud Bet. So that sounds like he's saying the exact same thing as Tanakama, which is going to be raised as a question, because it sounds like he's saying, if it's a safek chalal, it's okay, right? If it doesn't have any one of these things, meaning like a safek chalal, would be permitted. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Rabbi Meir. Notice that was Rabbi Meir. That was at least one version of Rabbi Meir. Now we're going to have a different version of Rabbi Meir. So we started with Tanakama. Then we're going to have the Tanakama of Rabbi Meir, which is the first Tana's opinion about what Rabbi Meir holds. So we have a regular Tanakama. Then we have a Tanakama about Rabbi Meir. And then we have Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says in the name of Rabbi Meir, and also Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer Kitvar. Both Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe had a different understanding of Rabbi Meir. Ezohi almanat isa, kol shenitma basafek chalal. Okay, which sounds like also he's saying the same thing. Anyone who is with a safek chalal, mikirin Yisrael mamzerim shebenehem ve'em mikirim chalalim shebehem. This line is going to basically contradict the thing he just said, because what it's saying here is everybody knows who mamzerim are, which means that if there's a safek mamzer case, it's not really a safek, because everybody knows we have a very good list. People keep very good track of mamzerim, which means safek mamzer is really not an issue. But ein mikirim chalalim shebehem. But chalalim are more secret. We don't really know who all the chalalim are, and therefore, if it's a safek halal case, we should be strict. And his first line said the exact opposite. In almanat isa, who we assume is permitted, because we know that almanat isa is permitted, is a safek halal. So something doesn't work. So we're going to have a question, all these questions that I already raised, we're going to see inside now. So Amar, first we're quoting opinion number one. That's the first opinion. So that's just a quote. I'm not going to repeat the translation. But ha chalal kasher, what derives from here is, if it's a safek halal, it would be permitted. First question is, Mishna hanaf deoraita, halal nami deoraita. Why are we going to be strict about safek mamzer, nitin, and eved? Because all those are forbidden by Torah law. If a woman has a relationship with one of those, she can't marry a kohen. Well, then we should be just as strict with a halal, a safek halal, because he's also deoraita. So that's question number one. Vitu, question number two, Amar Rabbi Meir, opinion number two. Like I said, each is going to have a question on each of these opinions. Shamati kol she'en ba'achad mikol elu misi'in l'kehuna. Hainu Tanakama. That's exactly what Tanakama said. And why is it listed then as a separate opinion? Vitu, thirdly, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer Kitvar, we're just quoting, makes Amud Bet a little easier. Most of it's just a quote of what we just read. Almanat isa kol shenitma basafek chalal mikirin Yisrael mamzerim shebenehem ve'em mikirim chalalim shebehem. So on the one hand, he said, right, an almanat isa, which is permitted, is safek halal. On the other hand, he said, safek mamzerim, we are not really safekot, because we know all the mamzerim, but safek halalim are problematic because we don't know all of them. Bahamar Reisha, didn't you say in the beginning halal kasher? And how can you be saying at the end, which seems to indicate we don't know who the halalim are, and therefore, if you have a safek case, you should be strict. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, mamzer soveach v'chalal shoteki kabenai. Rabbi Yochanan is going to add a whole new parameter to this whole braita. And he says, we're talking about cases, and the machloket between them is going to be about what if, when you call someone a mamzer, what's their reaction? Do they scream out and say, no, I'm not a mamzer? Or when you say they're a halal, are you silent? It's really going to be about both being your reaction. Is your reaction indicative of something? Normally in halacha, we say shtika kahoda'ah. If someone says you're a mamzer and you're silent, so if we hold by shtika kahoda'ah, your silence is like admission. So it must be you're a mamzer. Otherwise, you would have said, what are you talking about? I'm not a mamzer. Likewise with the halal. So now we're going to talk about how this mamzer tzovech the halal shotek ikabenai. Tanakama savar. We're now going to say that the topic of this braita is all about being silent or screaming and what that indicates. Okay, your silence or lack of silence. And it's going to indicate different things in different cases, possibly. Okay, depending on which opinion you hold by. Tanakama Saval. Now remember the problem with Tanakama. We said if he's going to be strict about the safek mamzer and netina and all that, because it's doraita, then he should be strict in a safek halal case as well, because it's also doraita. So now we're going to see that Tanakama really doesn't distinguish. And he was really trying to say something else. Kol psul, now it's not really in the pshat of the braita, but there's no other way to explain other than this, according to the Gemara. Kol psul dekarele v'shatik pasul. Anyone who you call them, you're a chalal, you're a mamzer, you're an atin, you're an eved, and they're silent, shtika koda, simple halacha. That's admitting they're right. V'hachi ka'amar Tanakama, and this is what Tanakama wants to say. Ezohi almanat isa, kol she'ein ba lo shtuk mamzerut, v'lo shtuk netinut, v'lo shtuk avdei malachi, v'lo shtuk chalal. So what he has to add is two things. Number one, add the word shtuk to the line, meaning not the silence of a mamzer, not the silence of and also add the chalal to the list. Okay, right? The list isn't complete anyway. There's more psulim, right? So just add him to the list, right? It meant to include chalal, and what he meant is almanat isa is a case where someone called you this name and you screamed out and said, "I am not." Okay, that makes you. And again, what is it? It's the almanat of this kind of person. So the question is, can she marry a kohen or not? If they were silent, she cannot marry a kohen. Everyone agrees almanat isa can marry a kohen. The question is, what is almanat isa? So he says almanat isa is someone who they called the husband, the previous husband, a mamzer, right? Her husband, she's a widow from. They called him a mamzer, and he screamed out, "I am not a mamzer." But if he was silent, that's not almanat isa. And it's the same holds true also for chalal. Pikamale Rabbi Meir, no. Hanachu de kapasale bakahal. Only the ones that you listed there. Now, halal wasn't listed, right? It meant to be included according to the way we understand Tanakama, but it wasn't listed. So Rabbi Meir says, those, I'm going to distinguish between the silence of a mamzer and a teen, eved, versus the silence of halal. Why? Hanachu de pasalehu bakahal. Those all can't marry anybody they want. Therefore, if you called someone a mamzer and they didn't respond, they must be a mamzer because you're messing up their entire life, right? They can't marry anybody now. Very limited. But shtuk chalal is kosher. You call someone a chalal, guess what? Who cares? It says, I can marry anybody I want. Right? First of all, there's no worship in the temple anymore, so it's not like, I can't go work in the temple. You call me a chalal. I can marry anyone I want. Now, it's true, my daughter will be a chalala. She won't be able to marry a kohen, but who thinks about that? It doesn't have huge ramifications. So the silence is not indicative of anything. It could be he was just sometimes people call you names and you just ignore them, right? Like, okay, you want to call me a chalal, what do I care? It's not an indicator of whether he is or isn't a chalal. So therefore, his shtika is not admitting that he's a chalal. He might just say, you want to call me a chalal, what do I care? Even though he's not really a chalal. So he distinguishes in that direction. So shtuk chalal doesn't indicate anything, isn't koda'ah. He's going to be, that's almanat isa, that even if you called him a chalal and he was silent, his wife can still get married because we don't assume he's a chalal. We don't assume his silence is admission. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the Tanakama de Rabbi Meir. That's why I called him the Tanakama of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar disagrees and says the absolute reverse. Now we're going to understand. I'll take it that you think, and now we're going to see why there were two interpretations of Rabbi Meir. I'll take it that you think that Rabbi Meir thinks there is a distinction, that not always is shtika kodah. But I'm going to tell you that it's the reverse. Lo dekaru le chalal v'shatik, ela dekaru le mamzer v'shatik. V'hai d'shatik savar mamzer kali idle. Aval mamzer tzovech v'chalal shotek pasul. V'hai d'ishtik savar mistiye de lo mafkeme le mekahal. So now, let's try to get this. If mamzerim, remember what he said. His words in the braita were mamzerim are all known and chalalim are not known. So what does he say? If someone calls you a mamzer and you know you're not on the mamzer list, you ignore them because they don't mean anything and no one's going to claim you're a mamzer because there's a list and you're not in that mamzer list. Everybody knows. Right? First of all, how many times people call mamzer in Hebrew language is used as a curse, right? It could be someone's just cursing you. So you don't say, right, when someone curses you and says you're a mamzer, right, you don't say, oh, I'm not a mamzer legally. That's not what they mean even. So He says mamzer kalele. Everybody knows there's a mamzer, so I'm not really worried. But mamzer tzovech, if he screams, I'm not a mamzer, that's an indicator, right? Often, right, this is funny, right? You can see the flip. If you scream about something, it's because you really have an issue and you're making a big deal about it. V'chalal shotek is pasul. Now, why is a chalal shotek pasul? Because a chalal is not so bad, right? We said that already. But if you start making a stink about it, what's going to happen? They're going to start looking into you and they might find something worse. So therefore, they say, "Hi to ishtik savar misdi de lo mafkele mekahal." At least right now, I can marry anyone I want. If I start screaming and they start looking into really researching my lineage, they might find something worse. So I'm better off being silent. At least now I can marry anyone I want, and I'll leave it. Therefore, his shtika is kahoda. He's admitting I'm at least a chalal. Maybe I'm worse, but I'm at least a chalal. So therefore, you come up with the opposite logic. This is where you could take logic and flip it on its head and come up with the exact opposite opinions. And we're going to further prove this by these braita. Tani chade, Rabbi Yosef omer shtuk mamzer kasher. If a mamzer silent, he's kosher. Shtuk halal pasul. But if a halal is silent, he's pasul, which is going to be the last opinion we just saw. But Tanya idach, a different braita says shtuk halal kasher, shtuk mamzer pasul, and lo kasher hatadakama leave it to Rabbi Meir, Harav Shimon Elazar leave it to Rabbi Meir. Those two braita each fall in line with the two opinions we just said. So even though our braita wasn't clear that shtuk was the issue, this braita makes it clear there's a machloket about whether shtuk is an issue or not, and that lines up with the two opinions the way we just described them. Amar Rabbi Yosef, new Mishna. It was a case of a young woman who went down to, a young girl who went down to get water from the stream, and she was raped on the way, right? It's assuming that to get to the stream was more of an abandoned place. She was raped on the way. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Question is, could she marry a kohen? So, remember, a woman who's married and raped can't marry a kohen, but a woman who was raped before she was engaged or betrothed or married or anything is not forbidden to a kohen unless she was raped by someone who's pasul. So now, right? It all depends on rov, okay, the majority of the city. To which the Gemara is going to ask, Amarle Rava Rav Nachman. Rava is going to ask, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Amar Kaman, who does he hold by? Ike Rabban Gamliel afilu b'rov psulim nami machshir. Ike Rabbi Yehoshua afilu b'rov ksherim nami pasil. We're going to end with a question of something that was obvious to us in the beginning of the daf, which is, if he holds like Rabban Gamliel that we're going to allow this woman to marry a kohen, well then you should allow it even b'rov psulim, because we already said whoever's machshir is machshir even b'rov psulim. And if we're going to forbid her, right? If it's Rabbi Yehoshua, he doesn't permit it even in rov ksherim. So rov ksherim shouldn't be a factor at all. Now, before I finish, I'll just want to point out this is a very difficult question, even though it seems very obvious and clear. But these two cases, we're comparing two totally different cases. One is a woman's pregnant and she claims this is right, and the whole thing we said about Rabban Gamliel is because he has a buried claim. She has a buried claim. She claims this, right? And maybe that's why he's machshir in b'rov. But here, it's just that she was raped. She has no idea who she was raped by, okay? So it's totally not the same case. So some of the commentaries, because it doesn't make any sense, they're asking this question, assume that the woman came forward and said, I know who the guy was, and he was kasher. And then it would be a bari, and it would be very comparable to the previous case. But that's not the simple reading of the Mishna, because it doesn't say that. So it's just interesting that they bring this question that's so obvious to them. It's a question, but it's really not so obvious that these cases are comparable. Anyway, we'll wait till tomorrow to get to the answer. Have a great day, everybody.